All right, welcome back. And after 29 days of testimony and 34 witnesses, Sean P. Diddy Combs could learn his fate this week.
Yeah, jury deliberations are expected to begin this morning. So joining us now is legal analyst Candace Kelly with what we can expect to happen today. So good morning to you, Candace. Great to have you here.
Good to see you both.
I mean, this is all kind of complicated when it comes down to the deliberations. So what kind of instructions do you expect the judge to give the jurors before they begin their deliberations?
Well, you know, this is really one of the most important times during this particular case where the jury can actually hear from the judge as opposed to the defense attorneys and the prosecution attorneys what you need to consider in the deliberation room. He's going to go over everything very painstakingly, especially that RICO charge, which is a really complicated charge that even if you've, gone to law school, it's something that people have a hard time to kind of sink their teeth into. I think it's a relatability issue. And because it has so many predicate acts, and for people who may not understand, there are many predicate acts. For example, kidnapping and arson and extortion and witness tampering. And when we look at that, you have to understand all of that in order to get 2 of those over the past 10 years to get to RICO. So he has to explain RICO, and he has to explain all of the underlying charges, and then he also has to explain sex trafficking, and then we've got the Mann Act, which is crossing someone across state lines for the purposes of prostitution and paying them for that. So he has a lot to explain, and this is going to be very, very important for them to understand so they can discuss.
And also building too off the closing arguments we saw just last week. In your observation here, how effective do you think the closing arguments were?
You know, sitting in the courtroom, when you look at, my goodness, sitting in the courtroom, alarm, look, they're probably going into the courtroom. Sitting inside of the courtroom, when you look at both sides, you kind of think of the fact that he didn't have anybody to testify for him, right? But then you think on the other side, the prosecution had 34 witnesses. But with the same token, you know that the defense had the opportunity to cross-examine those particular witnesses. So it's always a back and forth. But in terms of the closing arguments, I think that both sides did a very, very good job to really say, listen, this is what happened in our view. The defense, for example, Mark Agnifilo, he opened by saying this really is about 2 cases. This is about 2 trials. The trial that is shown by the evidence and the witnesses that came on the stand. And also there's the trial that the prosecution wants you to really believe. And we believe that this is not true. We believe that this is basically made up and that the people that have gone on the stand are lying. So I think that it was very interesting how they both presented both of their sides, and it just leaves so much to debate. One thing, though, I think that many people agree on is that if we're talking about prostitution in and of itself, just crossing state lines, that is a given. You cannot get away from the fact, I think, that Sean Combs paid people or had other people pay people to engage in prostitution. Now, that is up to 10 years. And I think that's something that the defense and even Sean might say, okay, maybe I get 3-4 years for that, have to serve part of the time, and I've already had time served. That's okay.
Yeah, you know what's really interesting? I mean, there are so many situations that were brought up, right?
Yes.
In this case, that a juror might think, well, that one doesn't seem real, so the whole thing is out. But that's not the case, right? If there's one case where there's not enough evidence in their juror's mind that actually happened and that makes him guilty of trafficking, that the whole case is out the window.
Right. And that's a distinction that the prosecutors made. They said, listen, you might think that certain amount of these interactions and intimate acts, sexual acts, were consensual. You might think most of them were. We just need one where you think wasn't consensual. We need one in terms of sex trafficking, which is force, fraud, or coercion, just one where there was fraud or coercion. And that's where that video from the Intercontinental Hotel comes in. If you believe that there was force in that particular case, then that's all you need. That one is something the prosecution really honed in on in closing arguments.
All right, Candace, it's a holiday week, and deliberations are underway.
Exactly.
So what could we infer possibly from how much time jurors take making their decision this week?
So, you know, when I look back at the R. Kelly case, I covered that case, and in one of the cases, it was 11 hours for deliberation. Another one of his case, because he had a state and federal charge, it was 22 hours. I would say that they're going to take one day to really go over what these charges are, another day to make their decision, discuss, let the foreperson do their job. Everybody has their say. I think they will sleep on it and then come back definitely before July 4th.
Hey,
That's my
That's key.
That's my guess.
That's key. And then come back and say, all right, we've all slept on it. Here is our decision. I think it's going to be 2 days. I really do.
You really do?
Oh, yeah, definitely. There's so much to consider, and there's so much, just the evidence, and we're in our 7th week.
Yeah.
That is a lot of people.
Yeah.
You have to go, first you have to start with Cassie. She was on the stand for 4 days. We have to go through that and each thing and find these holes that the defense opened up, and then what do we all think about it? And then on top of that, all 12 of us have to agree.
Exactly. Real quickly before we let you go, there's 3 different scenarios. There's guilty, not guilty, which we know the difference. But
sure.
What would lead to a mistrial?
Mistrial would mean that you just need one juror to say, you know what, I can't make up my decision, and then they might try it again. And if that's the case, I'm sure that the prosecution would try it again. I don't think that they would give up if there's a mistrial.
Oh my gosh, starting
all
over.
All over time.
I know.
All right, Candace Kelly, thank you so much for joining us here this morning.
Good
Thanks
to
for
see
laying
you.
that all out for us.
Absolutely.
Sure
Appreciate
thing.
it.
Good to see you.